My mother-in-law tucked $500,000 into my closet, intending to accuse me of theft right in front of a high-ranking guest. But I discovered the envelope much earlier. The place I decided to hide it transformed her triumph into public humiliation before the eyes of everyone present. Friends, you're listening to the Homefront Chronicles. If you're new here, join us by hitting subscribe. We're here for those who value true stories, and tell us in the comments where you're from. Every message from you is like a warm letter to us. Let's continue. The morning began with scrambled eggs, forlornly cooling on Sarah's plate. In a fleeting morning kiss, David managed to brush his lips against her temple in the short interval between a scalding sip of Arabica and a demanding call from a business partner. "Sarah, you're simply a culinary genius," David said, spearing the last oil-soaked pancake with his fork and leaning back in his chair with the air of a man whose day's life plan was completely fulfilled. "Remember when we went to your grandma's farm? She used to make mountains of pancakes just like these. I nearly burst back then, but I kept eating purely out of respect. You were begging for seconds then, weren't you?" Sarah brushed a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her hand, trying not to leave a trace of flour on her skin. "Grandma later whispered that you were a good catch, but too much of a gourmand, and advised me to feed you well so you wouldn't look at other women's cooking. A golden woman. Always listen to your elders." These few minutes spent together before the arrival of his mother remained those rare moments when their suburban home in Greenwich, Connecticut, truly resembled a cozy family nest. The idyll was shattered by the rustle of expensive silk on the stairs, announcing the appearance of Eleanor, who entered the dining room with the expression of a supreme judge who had already signed a death warrant. Clad in a faded rose-colored dressing gown, she cast a disdainful glance at the table and purposefully stared at a small puddle of sour cream on her son's plate. "David, you're clogging your arteries again, with this horror. I've told you repeatedly that mornings should start with tasteless rice cakes and some proper greens. In respectable homes, one does not breakfast on food fit for common laborers. Mom, it's just cottage cheese with raisins, not a portion of poison. It's cholesterol, sugar, and a complete degradation of gastronomic habits." Eleanor turned to her daughter-in-law, instantly switching her tone to that icy register she usually reserved for scolding a slow maid. "I understand, Sarah. Your background leaves its mark on the menu, but David needs a companion capable of maintaining a sophisticated conversation with investors, not a mousy cook smelling of burnt oil. Mom, please, no lectures." David grumbled into his cup, without lifting his eyes, displaying the same resignation with which people usually tolerate a leaky faucet. "These aren't lectures, but sincere concern for your future. You could have chosen an equal, a girl with manners, devoted and influential relatives, and instead, you dragged this into the house." She didn't finish the sentence, but such contempt hung in the air that it was almost physically palpable. Sarah silently tightened the belt of her apron, performing this gesture with the automatism of someone sentenced to lifelong corrective labor. Eleanor, meanwhile, shifted her attention to the disappearance of a carton of almond milk that had been languishing in the depths of the refrigerator since her last diet. "Eleanor," Sarah began quietly, her voice ringing with that dangerous politeness that usually precedes an explosion. "You personally poured that milk down the drain last night. You even called it a feline fiasco, to quote directly. And in the middle of the night, when I came down for water, I had the pleasure of observing you devouring cold pancakes with astonishing appetite, generously slathered with that very harmful sour cream." David choked, splattering coffee drops onto the white tablecloth. His mother's face momentarily lost its aristocratic pallor, twitching around the jaw, but she quickly recovered her mask of impenetrable virtue. One must not confuse a full meal with a momentary weakness caused by stress. These are entirely different categories. Undoubtedly, Sarah nodded with such fervent belief in what was said that David preferred to hide behind his porcelain cup for a good half-minute. "I have to run," he exclaimed, jumping up, hastily kissing his wife and trying not to look at his mother. "Sarah, thanks for breakfast. Mom, I beg you, refrain from any hostilities until I return. I never wage war. I merely try to instill a taste for life in those who lack it." After he left, silence descended upon the house, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock and the feeling that the air was charged to its limit. Around noon, Eleanor listened to a voice on the phone and burst into the room with the enthusiasm of a general learning of the enemy's unconditional surrender. "Martha, drop your pots and pans. That can wait until tomorrow," she shouted, addressing her unseen helper. "Victoria Hayes herself is coming, from the major energy conglomerate in the city. Do you even realize what a chance this is for my son's career?" Martha emerged from the kitchen, automatically wiping her wet hands on her apron and blinking. "Eleanor, is that the lady from the magazine cover? The one with the diamond brooch the size of a golf ball?" "Precisely, Martha, with that very brooch." Eleanor impatiently waved her hand, cutting off further questions. "Sarah, listen and remember. Brew my special chamomile blend, arrange for desserts from the bakery, and serve it all on the formal china. As soon as the cups touch the table, you immediately vanish into thin air and stay in your room. Outsiders have no business in the living room. I am perfectly capable of maintaining social etiquette." Sarah crossed her arms, feeling a cold stubbornness simmering within her. "I can entertain the guest or help with organizational details if needed." "Absolutely not." Eleanor offered a smile that usually portended a corporate firing. "David needs to look like a solid businessman, not a teenager showing off his accidental acquisition from the provinces. And please, put on something decent, at least for the 5 minutes you'll be pouring tea. Don't make me blush in front of such people." "Eleanor, allow me to clarify one point, please. The topic is closed, go get ready." Sarah retreated to the bedroom and began her usual countdown from 20 to 1. This self-control method, borrowed from a cheap self-help book, sometimes helped her resist the urge to pour boiling water on her benefactor's silk dressing gown. At 3 o'clock, her mother-in-law ostentatiously placed a hefty leather clutch on the dining room table, from which a thick envelope peeked out, showing the orange edges of $100 bills. Sarah, at that moment arranging eclairs on a silver tray, involuntarily slowed her movements. "Admiring it, dear?" Eleanor began fanning out the stacks, doing so with the flair of an experienced croupier in an elite casino. "Here is exactly $500,000. My friends from the Women's Charity Board collected these donations for the shelter. I was entrusted with managing this sum. And do you know why? Enlighten me, please, because my reputation is crystal clear, and I come from a circle where other people's money does not cause a feverish glint in the eyes." His mother-in-law made a significant pause, heavier than a cast-iron skillet. "I'll just tuck them away in my safe. I absolutely forbid you to enter my bedroom. I hope you're smart enough to understand why these precautions are necessary." "I understand perfectly," Sarah replied, trying to make her voice sound as unemotional as an automated customer service message. "Good girl. Sometimes you can be quite perceptive." Eleanor packed the money back and left, skirts rustling. Martha, who had been watching the scene from the doorway, shook her head sympathetically. "Sarah, if I were you, I'd put something a little stronger than chamomile in that tea, something that would keep her out of commission all the way to Manhattan." "Don't tempt me, Martha. I'm already on the edge." "I'm not tempting. I'm commiserating. And that's a bigger deficit in this house than genuine affection, almost like the difference between breakfast and late-night binging." Both let out a short chuckle, more like a cough, because the air in this house was catastrophically insufficient for normal breathing. At 4 o'clock, Sarah went into the bedroom to change out of her house clothes into something less irritating to the lady of the house's eyes. She reached for a shelf, but her hand froze, noticing a strange asymmetry in David's stack of shirts, which she had personally ironed that morning with the meticulousness of a forensic pathologist. One cuff was carelessly folded, disturbing the perfect order Sarah had strived for all these years. She knelt down and carefully lifted the fabric. On the bottom shelf, amidst the impeccable cotton, lay that very envelope, stuffed with someone else's millions. Seconds stretched into an eternity as a logical chain formed in Sarah's mind, sending a chill down her spine. The spectacle of counting the money was merely a prelude, a calculated move to direct suspicion towards the safe, while the true trap had snapped shut right here, under her husband's clothes. Her mother-in-law's plan shone with diabolical simplicity. The discovery of the theft, in the presence of the esteemed guest, would turn Sarah's life to ashes, and her excuses, to David, would look like pathetic attempts of a thief trying to wriggle out of a situation. "What a truly awful woman you are, Eleanor," Sarah whispered, surprised at how calm and even mundane those words sounded in the empty bedroom. Her first impulse was to grab the cursed money and throw it in her mother-in-law's face, screaming. But Sarah had learned her opponent's habits too well in 2 years of this silent war. One theatrical feint, one timely sob about the ungrateful daughter-in-law from the sticks, and David would once again side with his mother. A scream would mean instant surrender. She took a deep breath, feeling a cold determination crystallize inside her where fear had been. Sarah looked at the envelope and realized that this grenade couldn't simply be thrown out the window. It had to be returned to its owner, and done so discreetly, so that the detonation would occur at the most inconvenient moment for Eleanor. Her fingers moved with frightening speed. She straightened the shirts, returned the cuff to its original position, and hid the money in the deep, double-lined pocket of her sturdy apron. The envelope with $500,000, pressed against her thigh, felt no heavier than a grocery list. Changing into a light blouse and neat slacks, she dabbed lipstick on her lips and put the apron back on over her clothes. The mirror reflected an ideal daughter-in-law with a serene gaze, ready to serve tea and endure any humiliation, while a ticking time bomb rested in her pocket. "Well, Eleanor," she whispered to her reflection, and the corner of her lips twitched in a promising smirk, usually reserved for the final act of a long-running play. "Now we'll see who the real mastermind in this house is, and who was just passing through." Victoria Hayes deigned to arrive 40 minutes early, gliding from the depths of a black executive car that parked at the entrance with the predatory grace of a shark in shallow waters. Eleanor transformed instantly, shedding the skin of a domestic tyrant and donning the mask of a gracious hostess whose wide-open arms promised to smother the guest in an embrace of hospitality. "Victoria, darling, what an unexpected joy and a great honor for our humble abode. Please, come in. Everything is prepared to the highest standard." "Good evening, Eleanor." Victoria nodded with that polite coldness that makes mere mortals' eyelashes tingle. She casually carried a leather bag with gleaming gold hardware on her elbow, holding it as if it weren't an exorbitantly expensive accessory, but simply an extension of her own impeccable arm. "And this is our domestic ornament." Her mother-in-law pointed to Sarah with a gesture one might use to display a new umbrella stand. "Meet David's wife. She's organizing our tea. Sarah, go to the kitchen and don't delay." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Victoria Hayes." Sarah politely inclined her head, hiding the gleam in her eyes behind this deference. "Tea will be served in exactly 5 minutes." "Thank you, dear," Victoria replied with unexpected human warmth and proceeded into the living room, where she majestically settled onto the sofa, placing her bag beside her on a cushion. Sarah paused in the doorway for just a moment, long enough to fix her gaze on the unlatched clasp of the guest's bag, its maw slightly ajar, beckoning with its darkness. Her heart performed a short but furious dance in her chest, and a daring plan finally solidified in her mind, becoming clear and merciless. She retreated to the kitchen, where Martha was already clattering with the formal china, trying not to break the inheritance of past generations. "Martha, what do you think? Does this city lady consider us common folk?" Sarah asked, beginning to brew the chamomile, ensuring her hand movements remained fluid and didn't betray the frantic workings of her mind. "A lady's a lady, but her eyes, they see right through you." Martha glanced at the door and wiped her hands on her apron. "You can't pull one over on her, so you, Sarah, carry that tea steady and keep your back straight. You're the only one in this house who looks like a decent person." "Thanks, Martha. Your kind word is worth more than this entire china set right now." "All right, go on now, or Eleanor will have the guest diabetic from all her compliments." Sarah entered the living room, carrying the tray with such dignity as one carries state honors, and began arranging the cups with a deliberateness that her mother-in-law mistook for timidity and the guest appreciated as good manners. What a wonderfully delicate aroma. Victoria closed her eyes, inhaling the steam above the cup. "This isn't that packaged dust they sell as tea in our stores, is it?" "This is my own blend, Victoria. I gather the herbs in summer, drying them properly in the shade to preserve both their color and the plant's soul." "Lovely, simply lovely. Eleanor, your daughter-in-law not only has nimble hands but also rare taste," Victoria remarked, and something in her voice made Eleanor force a semblance of a smile. Oh, yes, Sarah is a diligent girl. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. You're free, dear. We have serious matters to discuss here. At that moment, Victoria's phone rang, and she, excusing herself, walked to the window, completely absorbed in discussing some charts and contracts. Eleanor, meanwhile, eagerly reached for an eclair, forgetting everything else in the world. Sarah acted on pure instinct. Her left hand adjusted the pastry stand, while her right hand, quick as lightning, slipped into her apron pocket, felt the weight, and with one imperceptible movement, transferred the envelope into the wide-open maw of Victoria's bag. The $500,000 silently settled to the bottom. The bag merely swayed slightly, having swallowed its bounty, and Sarah, her face unchanged, picked up the empty tray. Thank you for your service, Sarah, her mother-in-law tossed out, not even favoring her with a glance. Always a pleasure, Eleanor. If anything else is needed, I'll be at my post in the kitchen. As soon as she crossed the threshold of the dining room, Sarah felt a wave of heat wash over her and leaned against the cool wall, trying to calm the trembling in her knees. Martha immediately peered out from the kitchen, concerned. Sarah, why are you so pale? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Martha. Just a little dizzy from the heat. It'll pass. Sit down for a minute. I'll get you some cold water. No water needed. I'm already fine. She straightened up, adjusted the folds of her apron, and gave such a radiant smile that Martha merely snorted skeptically and returned to her dishes. The shriek erupted 20 minutes later, and it was a grandiose performance, worthy of a community theater's opening night. Eleanor flew down the stairs, wringing her hands, and wailing so loudly that the crystal in the china cabinet jingled. The money is gone. $500,000 that I put in the safe vanished as if through thin air. I knew it. I felt it in my heart, that a thief had crept into this house. Victoria slowly lowered her teacup to its saucer, looking at the hostess with the icy calm one reserves for a suddenly malfunctioning lawnmower. Eleanor, if a crime has been committed, we should immediately call the police and file a report. Her mother-in-law's face instantly shifted its palette from bright red to deathly pale. For the police meant a search, fingerprints, and the collapse of her entire cunning scheme. Oh, no, Victoria, why call the police right away? We are civilized people, and we can sort everything out ourselves. She stared at Sarah with a predatory gaze. We'll search her room immediately. I'm sure the missing money is right there. Well, go ahead and search. Sarah feigned such convincing heartbreak in her voice that even Martha in the hallway wiped an invisible tear from her apron. I haven't touched anything, but since you insist, let's go and see for yourselves. Let's go then, Eleanor hissed, with the grace of a cobra already eyeing its dinner. David burst into the house in the midst of the procession, looking as if he had just run a marathon in his business suit. What in Sodom and Gomorrah is going on here? Mom, why are you screaming so loudly the whole neighborhood can hear you? Victoria, please excuse this mess. I'll sort everything out. David, I've had a huge sum of charity money stolen, and I know exactly who's responsible. Mom, do you even understand what you're saying? I understand perfectly. Your wife is an ordinary thief, and now I will prove it to the world. Upstairs, immediately. They ascended to the bedroom in a full delegation, with Victoria looking like a casual spectator at a gladiatorial fight. Eleanor was the first to rush to the closet, furiously tossing piles of freshly ironed linen onto the floor, where the scent of the iron still lingered. Her fingers frantically fumbled through the shelves, but found only emptiness and the scent of lavender. But here, she must have hidden it right in this corner. She stumbled, realizing she had almost given herself away, and began frantically rummaging through the dresser. Mom, stop this disgrace. David stood by the door, his face turning an unhealthy crimson. Eleanor, already beyond reason with rage, yanked open drawers, and onto the floor tumbled David's old boxers with silly teddy bears, which he kept as a good luck charm from his first successful deal. The underwear landed right on Martha's stunned foot. Lord have mercy. What won't you see in old age? Martha recoiled, nearly knocking down the doorframe with her shoulder. Mom, stop it right now. David roared so loudly that his mother-in-law finally froze with another drawer in her hands. "Leave the furniture alone, David. You don't understand. $500,000 has disappeared without a trace." $500,000 of what, Mom? Where is it? Show me even one bill." He gestured around the chaotic room his mother had created. "You staged this circus in front of an important guest, accused my wife, and now you stand amidst a pile of old junk. You don't need to check closets. You need to see a good psychiatrist." Eleanor stood in the center of the destruction, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes futilely searching for what she had personally tucked under the shirts just hours ago. "I haven't gone mad, David," she whispered, losing the last vestiges of her former arrogance. "The money was definitely here. You just forgot where you put it and decided, out of habit, to lash out at Sarah. Let's go downstairs. Victoria has seen enough of our family happiness as it is." David walked out first, answering another call on the go. Victoria followed him, her face a stone sphinx, and Martha hurried back to the kitchen. Only two remained in the room, Sarah and Eleanor, frozen amidst the wreckage of her failed plan. Sarah took a step forward, coming so close that she could smell Eleanor's expensive perfume, which now seemed like the scent of decay. Eleanor, her voice was soft and quiet, like the whisper of a snake in the Garden of Eden. "I found your gift under David's shirts, right where you so carefully placed it." Her mother-in-law froze, ceasing even to blink. "I transferred that heavy envelope to Victoria Hayes's bag. She's downstairs on the sofa right now, and your millions are already warming up in her company." Eleanor turned to stone, her face resembling a wax mask from a horror museum, as the full scale of the catastrophe finally registered in her mind. Now she had no good moves. To raise a scandal and search Victoria's bag meant forever burying her son's career and being branded a crazy blackmailer. To remain silent meant to gift $500,000 to a wealthy city dweller and then painfully explain to her friends where their charity donations had gone. Sarah adjusted her hairstyle and once again assumed the demeanor of a humble daughter-in-law with nothing to reproach herself for. "Shall we go have some tea, Eleanor?" she said, with such care that her mother-in-law's legs buckled. It wouldn't do to leave Victoria bored alone. Her mother-in-law shambled towards the exit, feeling along the wall with the unsteady grace of a victim of a domestic calamity. Sarah walked ahead, openly displaying a smile she no longer needed to hide. In the living room, David awaited them, his silence weighing like a granite slab, and Victoria, calmly browsing the news, holding the bag with the unexpected bonus on her lap. "Victoria," Eleanor forced a smile, resembling a dessert plate cracked at the edges. "Please forgive this unfortunate misunderstanding. Allow me to place your handbag on the table. It really doesn't belong on the sofa. What if we accidentally spill tea on it? Thank you. I'll manage it myself." Victoria didn't even favor her with a glance, continuing to study her smartphone screen. "No, really. Let me just hold it for you while you enjoy your drink. You have important papers inside. After all, anything could happen. Eleanor." Victoria finally looked up from her phone, and there was so much coldness in her gaze that it would have been enough for a small icebreaker. "This bag contains my strictly personal belongings, and I prefer not to let them out of my sight for a second." Yes, of course. I just out of pure concern wanted to." Her mother-in-law reached for the leather handle, and her fingers glided over the expensive material with such greedy longing that David involuntarily stepped back from the window. "Mom, sit down, please." "Sit down and stop touching other people's property." Eleanor obediently settled on the edge of a chair, but her eyes continued to dart frantically from the bag to the doorway, with the frequency of a malfunctioning pendulum whose brakes had completely failed. Sarah observed this spectacle from the kitchen, through a narrow crack in the door, and saw her mother-in-law fidgeting, leaning forward at every rustle from the guest, and then recoiling in fright if David merely turned his head in her direction. "Oh, Victoria, what a charming handbag you have." Eleanor launched a flanking maneuver, clapping her hands with such fake delight that even Martha in the kitchen corner winced as if from a toothache. "The leather is simply exquisite. Such a noble sheen. I saw one exactly like it in our city's downtown mall, on the first floor. It was only $15,000. Just a copy of yours, really." Victoria slowly, with the dignity of an ancient statue, turned her head. Silence descended, lasting 3 long seconds, during which only the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway was audible, and David covered his face with his hands with a sigh. Victoria silently took her bag, placed it on her lap, and clicked the clasp shut with a dry, demonstrative snap, making the room feel even a few degrees colder. From the kitchen came a sharp, metallic clang. It was Sarah, who had dropped a spoon into the sink because her shoulders were already shaking with silent laughter, which she desperately tried to suppress by biting her lips. "Martha," she whispered, trying to catch her breath, "I'm going to die right here from this beauty." "Don't you dare die, Sarah." Martha stood nearby, also biting her lip fiercely. "It's too early for you." From the looks of it, the most spectacular act is about to begin. And it did indeed begin a minute later. Eleanor, whose forehead was covered in a fine sheen of perspiration, and whose fingers had shredded a napkin into a tight wad, suddenly stood up abruptly, swayed, and clutched the back of a chair. "Oh, I feel quite unwell. My vision is blurring. I'm going to collapse." She took a step towards the sofa, and her legs, weakened by very real terror, decided to take a permanent vacation. Her mother-in-law's body crashed onto the coffee table with all possible grace. The porcelain teapot performed an acrobatic somersault and shattered into pieces, and hot chamomile generously streamed onto the Persian rug. Victoria's bag slid from her knees, hitting the parquet floor with a dull thud, and the clasp, which had been secured just a minute ago, treacherously sprang open. All its contents spilled onto the rug: a wallet, a powder compact, lipstick, a business card holder, and that plump envelope from which stacks of $100 bills fanned out, leisurely scattering, right at Victoria's feet. A dead silence fell over the room, so profound that the sound of a car passing outside the window became distinctly audible. From the doorway came a crash. It was Martha, who, observing the scene from around the corner, had dropped a tray of clean cups. The china shattered in a second cascade, and Martha, recoiling, pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks in fright. 20 years I've cleaned other people's messes, but I've never seen such a flamboyant farce. That's it, Eleanor. I'm retiring right now. I've had enough of this circus. Victoria rose from the sofa. She picked up the envelope with 2 fingers, as if it were a suspicious object, read the inscription on it, and turned to Eleanor, who now knelt amidst puddles of tea and scattered money. "Eleanor," Victoria's voice was dry and sharp, without a single superfluous overtone. "Please explain to me how charity fund money ended up in my bag. Is this some form of bribery, or have you devised some primitive blackmail? What exactly were you trying to achieve?" "No, what are you saying, Victoria? For heaven's sake, it's not at all what you think. I would never, in my life, attempt such a thing." "Mom!" David loomed over her. His face changed before her eyes as he frantically pieced together the shards of the overall picture and recoiled in horror at the result. "You've been behaving like someone possessed all evening, circling this bag, grabbing it, constantly trying to get at it. What have you done here?" "David, listen to me. I didn't put that money in her bag. This is not my doing. I don't understand how it got there at all." "Then how did it end up in our guest's personal belongings?" He bent down, picked up a bill from the rug, and held it to her face. "Brand new $100 bills, the fund envelope. This is the money you were supposed to lock in the safe." "Mom, I'm asking you for the last time. What happened here?" Eleanor glanced wildly around, looked at the icy Victoria, then at her son, in whose eyes genuine fury was already boiling. Her last line of defense crumbled to dust, because the stigma of being a briber frightened her far more than the truth. At that moment, all the connections in her head finally snapped. "I hid them in the closet," she shrieked, losing the last remnants of her aristocratic poise. "In your bedroom. I put them under David's bottom-most shirts. I just wanted that girl to finally get caught red-handed, for everyone to see her true face." These words hung in the air, like a heavy burden, and Eleanor, realizing the depth of her failure, gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. But it was too late. David straightened up, stepped back from her, and looked at his mother as if seeing a completely unfamiliar and extremely unpleasant person. "So, you yourself planted the money in Sarah's closet," he said slowly, as if tasting each word. "You planned all this in advance, chose the moment with an important investor, just to trample on a person. David, you just don't understand. She's absolutely no match for you. She's just an ordinary girl. Silence. Don't you ever tell me again who is a match for me. Victoria disdainfully placed the envelope on the wet rug, picked up her bag, quickly gathered the scattered small items, and headed for the exit. At the threshold, she paused for a moment. David Miller, integrity in business, always begins with integrity in one's own home. If such Shakespearean dramas with planted cash are playing out under your roof, what serious partnership can we possibly discuss? Victoria, this is my mother's personal drama, not my company's stance. David took a step towards her, and true male firmness finally resonated in his tone. I will bring order here. I give you my word. Victoria looked at him with a long, assessing gaze, and something in her eyes subtly shifted, as if a tiny crack had opened in an armored door. First, sort out your family ruins, and then we'll return to business. If in a month I see that you have truly taken control of your life, perhaps I will offer you a second chance. Only perhaps. The door slammed shut with a thud. Victoria's car smoothly pulled away and disappeared into the evening twilight. Eleanor remained sitting on the floor, clutching the ill-fated envelope to her chest, crying now without any theatrical pathos, quietly, unbecomingly, and utterly broken. David walked past her without even slowing down, and began noisily ascending the stairs to pack his things. Late in the evening, when such silence settled in the mansion that the creaking of cooling pipes became audible, Sarah descended to the living room to clean up the shards. Eleanor had not moved. She sat in the corner of the sofa, mascara streaked across her cheeks, her once luxurious dressing gown now hanging on her like a shapeless sack. "You're a real snake," she hissed, without lifting her head. "You orchestrated all of this, didn't you? You found that envelope and moved it. You knew exactly what you were doing." Sarah paused, collecting the shards for a moment. She straightened up slowly and calmly, and Eleanor saw before her a woman who no longer had downcast eyes or a guilty tilt of her head. A thin, almost transparent smile played on Sarah's lips, making Eleanor instinctively shrink into the sofa cushions. "Eleanor," Sarah crouched before her, her voice almost tender. "I didn't lift a finger to prepare this finale. You set the stage yourself, wrote the script yourself, and invited the audience yourself. I merely helped your play reach its logical conclusion, and I must admit, the show was a grandiose success. Everyone thoroughly enjoyed it, especially me." Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Sarah instantly straightened, and her face assumed the familiar expression of meek weariness characteristic of a daughter-in-law forced to clean up after others. David entered with 2 suitcases, saw his wife surrounded by broken china, and his heart finally gave way. He placed his bags on the floor, walked to her, and hugged her so tightly as if trying to shield her from the entire world. "Forgive me for everything, Sarah. We're leaving here immediately, and no one in this world will ever dare to touch you again." "I know, David." She gently stroked the back of his head and looked over his shoulder at his mother. It was a short, emotionless glance, putting a period at the end of a very long and exhausting sentence. Standing at the threshold, firmly holding her husband's arm, Sarah turned around one last time. Eleanor stood frozen in the depths of the dark corridor, clad in a crumpled house cardigan and frantically clutching her envelope. In her eyes was the realization of the simple fact that she had dug this pit with her own hands. Sarah slowly, barely noticeably, winked at her with that gentle and poisonous sweetness that only a woman who had endured offenses for 2 years and finally earned the right to triumph. The door closed, and Eleanor was left in complete solitude, amidst the wet rug, the shards of former grandeur, and the silence that now belonged to her alone.